following presentation was recorded live in Orlando, Florida, for the 17th Annual Convention of the International Association of Square Dance Callers in 1990.
Okay, we'd like to get started, so if you could take a seat. Welcome to this session, which is called Sound Presentation and Techniques. My name is Jack O'Leary, and I'll be moderating this panel today. This session is being taped, and a little later on we'll have time for questions and answers. We will have a mic out there for you to use, and we would encourage you to get your question on the mic. With us today are two gentlemen who have more than a passing knowledge of the subject today. And as our discussion develops, it'll become clear that the way in which we communicate with our audience of square dancers is basic to our theme this year, building the foundation. We're going to examine some techniques of presentation from a broad range. And a lot of you are coming up asking, what are you guys going to be talking about? Well, there's a lot of things today. Some of them will be a little more technical, although Don assures me that it's not going to be too technical. Even I can understand it. So I think you'll find it very interesting. But beyond the technical aspect, we're also going to be looking at some time-proven methods of presentation from the perspective of individual performance. On our panel today is a man who hails from Melbourne, Florida, which is about an hour from here, isn't it? Just about? An hour and 20 minutes. I called Dale a couple of weeks ago just to finalize the presentation here, and he was telling me this story about he was out in a golf course that afternoon, you know, and I'm back in Connecticut shoveling snow. So, life is tough. But Dale has been calling 25 years, and so has some experiences to share with you. He tells me he averages 12 dances a week. That's a lot of dances. And most of them are the same people over and over, same clubs. And he calls from mainstream to advanced. And he's going to have some comments about presentation relating to sound that have worked for him throughout his 25 years. And also with us today is a gentleman who makes his home in Stowe, Massachusetts. And he was probably shoveling snow the same day I was when I talked to Dale. He's a CALLERLAB accredited caller coach, author and publisher of Choreo Breakdown, which is a caller's note service, author of Out of Sight, a caller's text, recording artist on Sets in Order, 4-bar B labels, and last but not least, the author of Ferris Wheel, Ping Pong, Circulate, and Chain Down the Line, Mr. Don Beck. I don't think I mentioned Dale McClary's last name. It's Dale McClary's with us. Let me just kick things off by taking you back to the late 50s, early 60s, before some of the compact and efficient sound equipment that we use today had even been developed. It was before the sound column, when sound system used vacuum tubes and weighed a ton to carry around. Some of you remember those. Names like Bogan, Newcomb, Caliphone. Hilton was just emerging at this time. And even some of those early models were tubes. We used to use these open back speakers, and if the hall was extremely tough and we needed to cut through the floor noise, we had these big horn speakers. And some of the equipment that may seem primitive to us today was used effectively by callers back then because they knew how to obtain the most out of what they had. And we can learn from that as we step up to our state-of-the-art equipment today. And I think our understanding of some of the technical capabilities that Don will be talking about, together with some tips for achieving the most from our presentation, will be helpful, and that'll be our focus today. So without any further ado, let me turn the session over to Don Beck. Don?
Thank you, Jack. I'm kind of excited about giving this talk. I have talked before groups of CALLERLAB before on a variety of subjects of choreography and timing and body flow and some of the mechanics of calling, and other calling groups too, callers groups. But I haven't had the opportunity to pass on the information I have here in the past, except to our local Callers Association. What I'm about to do, and Jack mentioned it's technical, it's technical of nature, but it's not. And what I'm about to talk about is the basic design of loudspeaker systems and the advantages and why a column speaker differs from a bass reflex or a folded horn speaker, and what makes it different, and how, in my opinion, column speakers have the advantages that can be taken advantage of for our calling. For square dance calling, column speakers have a lot to offer if used properly. And what I would like to do is pass along to you guys the information on how they work, what makes their characteristics different, and why, and demonstrate that dynamically so that you will understand what they do and why. And then when I tell you good ways to take advantage of what they're doing and not to waste the benefits they have, hopefully it will make sense from the demonstrations I've given so that you will more easily remember them and take advantage of it, and maybe even see some obvious things that I've missed. The reason that I have a lot of knowledge about speaker systems, well, it's twofold. One is that when I started out calling, most callers were using yak stacks in our area, in the New England area, sort of the home of the yak stacks, and I wasn't about to spend that much money for just a loudspeaker. One is because I couldn't afford it. At least I didn't think I could. So I did a lot of research, and I decided I was going to build my own. And the more I started to look into what it took to make a reasonable speaker for what we need and why stacks versus the other things, the more I found out that Irvin Gross had designed his thing properly, and he understood this all well before my time. Anyway, part of it, my looking into this, was because I was interested and cheap. Part of it was because of my other career. I am trained as and have practiced for 25 years as a mechanical engineer. I've been an audio buff. I've been and still am a ham radio operator, and that gives me a lot of electronics background. I've had jobs as an electronics technician and such. More than just a passing acquaintance with some of the mechanical and electronic things that go into loudspeaker design. Before getting on and getting into the talk, I would like to mention, as Jack said, this session is being taped. And right now I think I'm speaking mostly to those people that are listening on the tape or will be listening on the tape eventually. The electronics that takes our sound up to the tape recorder and to the loudspeaker is one thing. Once it leaves the loudspeaker, travels through the air and gets to your ears, it does a different thing. And I'm going to be working with the loudspeaker design, what comes out, and that will not show up on the tape recorder. My apologies, but the demonstrations will not seem vivid on the tape, and there will even be some occasions probably when I have to unplug the electronics and such from the taping mechanism, or you'll get nothing but a tone coming through. It won't be quite as good for the tape. It is mainly intended for those of you that are here, but we'll try and describe what we can on the tape. Also, when we do have questions later, if we do have questions, when we have question and answer period, we would prefer that you speak into the microphone also. We have one here. It's not connected to anything. Hopefully it will be very soon, or at least when we need it. No, we have the wires here. All we got to do is take the time to do it. We chose to go through the Hilton Yak Stack or Director approach rather than the house system because I think it works out more practically for our setup. I've made out some handouts that will probably help explain some of the things I'm doing, and Jack is going to pass those out now. We'll refer, there are 3 figures there, and we're going to refer to those one at a time. It's not necessary to look at them before I refer to them, and those of you on the tape are going to have a real trouble listening to them, looking at them. The last thing I wanted to mention was that we have a fairly large hall, much larger here than the one that I was working with when I've done these demonstrations before. It's going to make some of the visual effects fairly difficult to see from the back. If you guys are interested in coming up later and seeing it, or even crowding up to the front, that'll help. It may be an advantage on some of the sound demonstrations. We'll see how it works. Anyway, I'd like to start by asking for one of the handouts so I can refer to it. I didn't keep one for myself. It'll come up eventually. I'd like to start with, and what I'm going to talk about now, thanks. We need another one down front here. What I'm going to talk about first, in fact, the whole thing, I'm sure, is going to be fairly, some of the stuff you guys already know. Thanks. I got the extras up here now if you want to. Some of the stuff you guys already know. Some of it, I'm sure, is obvious when I talk about it, but you may not have formulated into being pertinent to our calling. I'm going to try and start very easy, so bear with me on that, and go up just about to the edge of what I understand as far as the principles. But hopefully there will be stuff that I talk about here that will be new and that maybe you can apply right away when you go home and start calling again. And if nothing else, hopefully it'll be entertaining in the process. Let me start by talking about sound in general. Sound is basically airwaves traveling from a source that's vibrating to your ears that vibrate. You want more, you have extras. Extras. I would appreciate that they get back here eventually. There's no rush on that. Compressed airwaves traveling from my voice or from the loudspeaker this time to your ears. You can picture them as some people say if you drop a stone in a quiet lake, you'll see the ripples emanating equally out all around from that. If you look at figure 1 on the handout, it sort of represents that. When sound waves are not really ripples as in water, but they're really sections of compressed air and then rarefied air. And by rarefied, I mean it's the opposite of compressed, as you know, as you get up an airplane or a mountaintop, so lower pressure. And represented by the dots in the picture, the compressed parts. And you get these alternating waves of compressed air and rarefied, and it's sort of, the compressed is the pressure, and when it hits your eardrum, it pushes on it, and then the rarefied, it sort of pulls back on it. And when we produce sound with a loudspeaker, all we're doing is putting electronic energy which simulates the sound into a loudspeaker, which is generally a paper cone, a big round cone or a small round cone that moves out to push the air, moves back in to suck on the air to give you a little vacuum, and then out again and moves back and forth at frequencies faster generally than we can see, causing compressions and rarefications to go out in even waves. I've got a demonstration here showing with slower. At this point, we're going to switch to one of the other mics here. Hold on. Hopefully this will work. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4. Hopefully this will work adequately, but I tend to want to talk with my hands on this one, or do the demonstrating the same. First thing, and again, this is probably the one that will show up most poorly from back there, and you might want to look at it later, but it's just basically a cheap disposable loudspeaker that I've got hooked up to a power source, a battery, at a very low frequency rate, not the 20 to 20,000 cycles per second that sound is, but just to show the speaker cone going back and forth. And I'm sure the front rows can see it, and possibly the back rows can. And it's just moving in and out in a little bit more magnified version than you would normally get with a normal speaker, but that much is possible. And while it does that at a much faster rate, it's just compressing the air and then refracting and just moving it like this. Now, one thing that you might note when I'm turning the back side of the speaker is that the back of the cone is moving also. It's pretty obvious. I think you can see the back of the speaker better on this particular speaker here. The cone is on the front. There's also a cone on the back. And common sense says that while the speaker is pushing out to the front, it's pulling in from the back. And while it's pushing out in the back, it's pulling in from the front. So I'm getting compressions on the front at the same time I'm getting rarefications off the back, and vice versa. And if you look at figure 2, I've got a speaker, a small speaker there, pushing sound out to the right. there's a baffle to protect the front from the back, and it's pushing, and we've got the similar thing on the back side, except out of phase. You'll notice where the dark is, you've got the light on one side, and they're sort of, alternate rings as they're going out from the center. If you don't understand anything at any point, just let me know, and we'll see if we can answer the question quickly or save it for later, depending on what kind of a thing it is. Now, an interesting thing, and it's kind of fairly common sense. I know you've all heard of speaker phasing and what have you, but basically what speakers and phase mean is that if you've got sound coming out being compressed at the same time as you've got sound that's in the other cycle, as the back, say the front of the speaker being compressed and the back of the speaker rarefied, where those two things come together, if I didn't have that baffle here, you'd have the dark and the light coming together and absorbing each other, sort of blending and averaging out and not really having much sound. And we want to do a quick demonstration right here, which is going to take a minute to manage. Let's see. We'll start. For those on the tape, we're going to turn the mic off, and we'll have to do this for a second here because of feedback. Some sound coming. Did you all hear the difference? Okay. Has anybody played that simple little trick before in that simple little game? Whether you raise your hands or not, it's okay. This comes from my days of audio buff and just trying to get hi-fi when I couldn't afford it and trying to create my own things. But picture the difference that baffle makes, just keeping a little of that front sound away from the little of that back sound. Picture the old Bogans with a 12-inch speaker and the open back baffles, and how good those must be, and how much they could be improved upon. What do we do about that kind of a baffling situation to keep the back stuff? Well, this is one thing we can do. The best thing you could have is totally isolate the front from the back. Mount it in a wall. Then you could sound one hall with the front of the speaker, another hall with the back of the speaker, and the two wouldn't mix. It'd be no problem. That's not totally practical to carry your own wall and your two halls around all the time. So what people do is they put a box around the back. Now what happens with the box? Inside the box, that sound hits the back wall, bounces back, bangs against the back of the speaker wall, cone, and interferes with it in different ways. And so there's been an awful lot of work in designs of make the box big enough so the sound will get lost in there before it comes back, like the same size of another room. Put sound absorbing material inside the box, rubber, foam, fiberglass, what have you, to absorb that sound. There are cases in the bass reflex speakers where they make that path for that sound to come around so that by the time they bring it to a port on the front, it's out of phase and reinforcing the stuff from the front and reinforcing some of the low notes. But we don't have to know that about that right now. The main thing I want you to know is I want to show that sound does in fact cancel each other, one to the other. The front to the back of the speaker is important to isolate one from the other. If I were to have two speakers working with each other, and I have them wired up so that one is pushing while the other's pulling, or vice versa, even though the back is, and these are speaker systems that are totally baffled and the back is isolated. We now have a baffle, a box, everything's fine. But the two of them are wired out of phase, so one is coming while the other is going. The proper way is both going together, both coming back at the same time. But I've got them out of phase. They're going to do the same thing as I've done here, canceling each other. You've all heard, if you're using more than one speaker system, make sure it's in phase. I want to do a little demonstration that I really enjoy doing because I'm amazed by it every time. But it shows the cancellation of two speakers out of phase with each other quite dramatically. To that, actually, we have in this director 4 speakers on the top section, 4 on the bottom section. And they're all connected, so all 4 go at once, and all 4 come back at once. I can do a little magic here if it works right. Right now I'm only talking through the top section. And I'm going to put a little extension cord on the bottom section here. So I should be talking through both the top and bottom again. And I'm going to switch it so that my extension cord is strictly on the top because it's going to be a little less messy here. Okay, I'm talking through both sections right now. And the other thing I want to do, and it won't project as well this way, but it's necessary for the demonstration, is what you did. Lucked out again. How are we doing on this now? Okay, we got full sound. Both speakers back in phase. For those on the tape, we had half of a director yak stack working in phase with the other half. In phase, and they worked together, out of phase, and they canceled sound considerably, especially when pointed at each other. It's fairly a dramatic demonstration that canceling in effect does happen. Let's go on to the next step here. This is the point where it gets a little harder to explain and understand, but I think we got it so it works out pretty well. Let's say I have two speakers working together that are in phase. They're both working properly together like this. I've done everything right. Let's talk about the two adjacent speakers on this stack, for instance. The sound compression coming out of the front of this one is coming out at the same time as the front on the other one, and they're working together and reinforcing each other, and then that's the compression, and then the rarefaction behind them is working together as you've got a pressure and a vacuum going back, and the contrast between the compression and rarefaction is the thing that's causing your ear to respond to it and hear it. And coming off the front, that's cool. I got a wave coming out the front, another wave coming off behind it, and a little space in between them that's the rarefaction. What's happening, these are my two speakers. I'm looking out towards the side right now. That wave, as you saw in figure 1, is not only coming off the front, figure 2, I think, is better to see it, coming off the top, the side, coming off in every direction, spreading out up until it hits the baffle. Let's look at what's happening off the top here. I've got a wave, a vacuum, a pressure, and a vacuum. Immediately below it, I have another speaker. That's sending off the same kind of a thing, but it's starting at a different location. And where this compression comes up from one, and then compression off the other, the sound is coming off at the same time. This one, all of a sudden, well, maybe if you look at fingers, compression, refraction, rarefaction rather. I have troubles with that word, my apologies. They're such at a point that the compression of one is hitting at about the same point the vacuum of the other one's hitting. And they end up, you don't have the contrast of vacuum and reinforced pressure, but you have one canceling the other out in just sort of a grayscale. And probably the best way to see that is turn your pages over and look at figure 3. You look at the two grays working together, going straight out front, you've got a heavy contrast between the white and the two grays coming up with a darker gray. Going off the top and off the bottom, because of the points they start at, the two grays, one gray is filling in the white of the other, and you don't have the contrast between gray and gray or gray and black. You just have one gray mass, one pressure mass, and there's nothing to move that eardrum back and forth. So effectively you have an increased pressure coming off the front, a decreased pressure going up the top and the bottom, decreased sound wave and amplitude. And if you look at that gray or the darker gray area and interlaced with the white, you can actually see a pattern that off the front it's coming off about, like this. It's not going the full thing like a single speaker would, but it's a tighter wave. It's focused out the front. How much focus it has. Jumping ahead in my outline. No, I'm in the right place. How much focus it has, how tight that angle is, can be fairly technical. There are a number of ways to do it. You can calculate roughly a thing. There's an equation that says the angle that it focuses equals 70 times the wavelength of the sound divided by the length of the column, or the length of the line. And that's how much that angle to bring it down to a 3 dB loss off the center line. Not important at this point. The only thing to catch that's important there is the length of the column makes a difference and the wavelength of the sound. The wavelength meaning the frequency. Low sounds versus high sounds. Low sounds require a longer column to get a tight pattern. High-pitched frequencies don't require as long a column, much shorter column to get a similar shaped pattern. If you have a column that's too long, such as one, say, that's correct for low frequencies, and use that same length of column for your high frequencies are going to be down to a narrow pattern, and you just have to aim that really carefully or you're going to miss your audience, or work around it some other way. Another way, I'm just digressing slightly, this is something that came up after I prepared my talk. I found out that the ACSTAC people, Herb Gross, has prepared a very nice thing called the Directional Characteristics of Loudspeakers. Make them work for you. Herb, are these available for anyone that wants them over there? They're available in the ACSTAC booth over there in the distributors area. It takes a totally different approach of talking about this, says the same thing in a different way, some ways more technical, some ways less, has better diagrams to some extent, and I think would be a good supplement if you're interested in the information you're getting here. What Irving did, because he was designing these and because he had the equipment and the area, is rather than calculate what these measurements were, and I'm sure he started by calculating, but he did the final test, is he took a power meter out at a certain distance and he actually went and measured different places to see that in fact the dispersion was appropriate. Let's take a look at what we have with a column here. No, I'm getting a little ahead of me. I missed one important point. The one thing that we're concerned about is getting sound out to our group, the main thing. And if I have this column right here, and I just did a quick calculation at 1,000 cycles, at 1 kilohertz of sound, which is somewhat the middle of our communications area. It's pretty close. It's one of the ones that's used. To be down 3 dB is about a 30-degree angle if your column is 2¼ feet. And I think this one's slightly longer than that. I'm not positive. But anyway, this kind of thing is great for the majority of sound we're using, but our high frequencies would be focused so much you might miss your audience. So what is done in the better columns, and maybe in the cheaper ones, I don't know, but one of the principles I read about a long time ago, and sure enough found out the Yak Stack knew about already because they've been in the business longer than I had and follow, is the fact that this is a long column for the low frequencies, but it's a short column for the high frequencies. There are 4 speakers in each half. These center 2 speakers are different than the others. These have tweeters built into them. Actually, high-frequency cone whizzers, but basically special devices that are used to extend the high-frequency range of a speaker. So effectively, your high-frequency column on these is about that big, whereas the low-frequency and mid-range is quite a bit longer than that. So it's specifically designed so that you do not focus the high frequencies too much, but just focus the low ones, which need a longer column, so you get about the same angle of dispersion vertically. The old Yak Stacks, which I have one of home, by the way, this one I didn't have to lug with me, and I'd like to thank Supreme Audio for loaning me this one for the demonstration. The old Yak Stacks are 6 speakers, 3 in each section. The center 2 are the ones that produce the high frequencies. A slight digression, but this might be interesting to some of you, that when you're using your stack separated, 2 separate ones, or just taking half of it to the dance, it's good to get the high frequency high enough so that you can be heard, because the high frequency tends to be easier to baffle it, and you get it in the way. Be sure you use either the bottom half, so the high frequency is on top, or the top half flipped upside down, so the high frequency is on the top. But don't bury just half of it with the high frequency speaker down behind your amplifier or something. Make sure it's up where it projects. If you buy, I know what they used to sell as a half yak. I don't know whether they still do. But I believe those were not the same as half of one of these, but they had the high frequency speaker in the center, so it would be centered. Am I correct there in that, Irv? Yeah, thank you. So that's a good thing to know where the high frequency is and to use that shorter column for what you're doing. Now let's go back to looking at this thing. Another prop. Let me believe this is a column, because I don't want to carry that one around right now. But I have a length of a column here, my sound going out to the side there. That pattern we've talked about is not a full dispersion, but it's narrowed down some. If I look at the top of that column, I have a point source. If I'm looking at the top of that, down from the top, I have a point source of sound. So that this way it's a short column. And so I'm not causing any interference patterns out to the side. So I have full dispersion to the side. And this, in fact, is what I want. I want the dancers down there to hear me. I want the dancers over there to hear me. I have a wide dispersion this way. But I don't care about the dancers on the ceiling. You're calling too excited and they shouldn't be dancing on the ceiling in the first place. I don't care about the dancers that are on the floor. I want a narrow dispersion this way, the long part of the column, a wide dispersion to the side, the wide part of the column. In here and in the width of the speaker, I have somewhat of a width out to the side already. One of the clever little tricks that Yak Stack has done with this latest column is to increase the horizontal dispersion just slightly. They've taken each speaker in there and alternately angled it just a little off the side, so one of them gets that, one of them gets that, one that, one that. You still have the same focusing vertically, but you've even gotten your that way. Horizontal dispersion a little bit wider, which is a nice trick, and it helps quite a bit from what I understand. I haven't had the opportunity to use one in a hall.
Question, Jeff.
Yes?
When you were talking about one this way and one that way, is that the formation of the column the way it's made, or was that the speakers within the column?
If the question is, what do I mean by this slightly offset? If you look at the picture on the handout that they have available, not the one that I handed out, but they have available, you can actually see that the speakers, as they're mounted inside the case, below the grill work, are mounted. The area that they mount is off by a few degrees left and right inside. If you just leave it that way, it's doing that automatically. You don't have to know that. It just works better for you. But it's nice to know that they've done that for you. That's basically what a column does, why it does it, how it focuses sound vertically, low dispersion vertically, wide dispersion horizontally. Now, how can we use that? How can we make the most of it? What can we do with it? One is that when we're aiming at a group of square dancers, we're aiming the sound down at them. We're not aiming some at the ceiling, where it's going to bounce off the ceiling and hit the dancers again. Now, you wonder if one's good, why isn't two better? If they get the sound once, why not getting it off the ceiling a second time is good also, or a third time? I tell my dancers that say that we can't hear. I say, well, if you can't get it the first time, get it the second time around. Jokingly, in halls where the acoustics are pretty bad and there are echoes. But basically, we want them to get it once, clear, crisp, from the speaker, not off the walls, not off the back wall, not off the ceiling. So when you have a point source, a single speaker, and your sound is pointing both up and down, or going out that way and that way, not just focused, you're going to have reflections off the ceiling, bouncing down, hitting the dancers, going back up, off the ceiling, back down. This column arrangement helps to eliminate that greatly. And that, by the way, those diagrams of showing the reflections and the actual sound levels in the YakStack booth's handout, they have some good drawings where they've taken actual measurements and show you that kind of stuff if you're interested. It's a good place to look at that. Basically, what you want to know is you want to focus it, send the energy, sound energy, where you want it, but not waste it going up to the ceiling, not going down to the floor. So you're doing two things by not sending it up there. One is you're not giving reflections back, echoes back that people don't want. Two is you're not wasting energy. You're using the energy more efficiently. You're sending it all out where it wants to go, where the people go, instead of sending extra stuff where you don't need it. We're going to talk a little bit more about speaker placement and just how to take the maximum advantage of that. But there's one more demonstration that I want to do. This one, I haven't had from back here, it's not as dramatic. I think it will be from out there as these other dramatic as these other demonstrations. I think it will be. I'm not 100% positive. We got to see what it's going to do. But what I'm going to do is let you experience the directionality of this column. I hope. We'll see what happens. The first thing I've got to do, and for this, those people listening on the tape, you will hear the full demonstration. You won't get the effect, but you're going to hear it, but you might not like it. Basically, I'm going to put a single tone, if this works, through the speaker. And what we're going to do here is, instead of you walking around listening to the pattern, I'm going to move the speaker so you can hear the pattern. First, I'm going to take and rotate it on its horizontal axis, and supposedly the sound will not vary too much for you. Until we get it off the backside. And what I'd like to know is, did you hear too much variation? Because as I say, from here, I can't tell. Okay. Now we're going to try and let you, instead of having you go from the floor to the middle to the ceiling, we're going to turn the speaker on its side and vary it that way. Sorry about that, Scott. I think it's about the same amplitude. You should be in the middle of the pattern now. As the center goes by you, it should get louder and then dramatically softer. Mic off, sorry about that. How many of you could hear more of a dramatic difference that way than the other way? At least half of you. Good. As I say, that one I have had not much opportunity to get out in front of the speaker and actually hear it, nor enough time to experiment as to what frequency would work out the best that way. But theory said it should happen, and I'm glad you did hear some difference. Once again, let's get... I think at this point I can go back to the way I'm normally comfortable on a regular mic. Okay. Callers are used to having something in their hands. Much better. The only thing I need my hands for now is turning the pages here. One of the things is how do you place your speakers so you get maximum advantage. What we're trying to do is focus this sound. We're trying to get this pattern so we can take full advantage of it. And the way I do it, one of the things you want to do is make sure you don't interfere with the pattern. I use a stand for my yak stack. I keep it right up there in the air so that I don't have anything interfering with the pattern on the top and the bottom on the sides, so I get that full appropriate pattern. I was given a yak stack stand by one of my clubs many years ago, and my mind had mixed thoughts about the time. One was, oh God, something else to carry. Oh well, that's nice they gave me a nice gift like that. And mainly, oh boy, now I've got a few places where my speaker is very precarious. This will hold it much more steadily. I found out, much to my surprise, that my calling got better. Basically, that the sound got better, and when they can hear you better, your calling's better, and they love you more, and we like that whole routine. But basically what happened is, because the speaker was suspended out there, and there weren't interference from the tables and the floor and everything, I got a much better pattern, and dancers could hear me better. It made a big difference. If you don't use a stand, if you don't want to use a stand, and what other reasons, one of the things you can do, and should be very careful about doing, is if you're going to put your speaker on the edge of a table, put it on the edge. You notice I have it placed here so that the sound pattern can come off the top and bottom and not interfere and what have you. I see an awful lot of callers put it a foot back from the edge of the table, put it 3 feet back from the edge of the table. Here, 3.5 feet is about the limit, but they have the table going the other way. And what they're doing is really messing up the pattern on the bottom. Your sound doesn't have a chance to cancel. You don't have a chance to get the appropriate beam in the appropriate shape you want. If you're going to use a table, get on the edge of it. Another thing to really watch out for is, and I've seen some dramatic demonstrations of this, if you are working on a stage in an auditorium or a school or a gym that may have a stage at some end, or a church or whatever, very frequently there's a curtain that goes across but is opened, and there's a cornice of that curtain along the top. And that pretty little part hanging down with the symbol of the school or maybe the club banner on it frequently is pretty close to where the top of your speaker is. If you are behind that speaker, that cornice, your speaker is behind it, that is going to screw up the top part of your sound, of your pattern, and interfere with it. Our association had a dance once where we invited lots of different members of clubs to showcase some of our callers. Fairly nice hall. The shape, the size, and everything else was really good. Dancers weren't dancing in the back of the hall. I didn't set the sound up. One of the other sound experts in our association did. And they were having troubles hearing in the back. That's why they weren't dancing. And I took a walk down the side of the hall, and the volume was fine up until about 2/3 of the way down, and it disappeared. The sound just went, whew. And I said, something's wrong. And I went back and looked, and we had a cornice on the curtain on there. I moved the speaker 3 inches, maybe 4 inches forward, and everybody could dance. It really makes a difference. One of the more obvious things, but some callers don't seem to care, is you got a basketball backboard and net hanging down in front of your speaker about 6 feet out. Boy, does that raise havoc with the pattern. Get it out of there if you can. If you can't, move over to the side of the hall, over the side of the stage, and work from the side and point at the opposite corner. It makes a big difference. Get by it. Dancers tell me, geez, you know, the basketball's always there. Our caller uses that regularly. Boy, we always have troubles hearing in this hall. But they never relate the two. The exact placement you want to do this speaker, and I was wondering quite how to say this. Now I can say the best thing is that Eric's got some great diagrams in here. You want this thing to be above the heads of the dancers a little bit and aimed down so that the dancers in the front are on the fringe of the center, highest energy part of the curve. The dancers in the back are right in the middle of it, but that will make the loudness up front and in back pretty close to the same. These people here are closer to the speaker, so it's going to be loud, but they're not in the center of the pattern. They're back where it's canceled more. The people in the back are closer to the center of the pattern, but further from the stage. So the volume back there will be loud enough, and the volume up here will be not too loud. Also, I like to aim it. Actually, you can sort of look through the two halves of the stack and aim it. Aim it so that the center line goes maybe back where the floor and the back wall meet. That's a good angle to get it up. This above the heads of the dancers a little bit, hitting back to the bottom where the two come together. One of the things that I see people do an awful lot, or people talk about doing, and this is something that maybe now will be obvious why you shouldn't do. First of all, one thing I want to mention, another thing on speaker placement, it works best if you have a hall, as most of them are, that's not square but rectangular, to work from one of the long ends. And that way you can project nicely down the full hall and not have to worry too much about the wide dispersion. Some halls are set up with a stage on the short end, on the wide end rather. And that way you've got a wall close to you right away, right in back, and the one straight ahead is fairly close off the short wall, and you've got sound possibly bouncing back at you, but you've got really wide dispersion. There's only 3 squares deep and 4 each way on the left. 3 by 8 is 24. When's the last time we had 24 squares in one of our dances? So anyway, if you can, work from the long end, on the short wall, working down the long end. That helps quite a bit too. People talk about, well, geez, we're having troubles with the sound in this hall. I want to use 2 speakers, 2 stacks, 2 something. What should I use? How should I do it? And I see guys that will take their stack and cut it in half and put half on this wall, and on this side of the stage, and half on this side of the stage. Well, what are we doing? When we cut it in half, first of all, we totally lose the focusing design that this thing was made to have in the first place. 2 is we have the 2 speakers interfering with each other. The pattern of one is coming over and interfering with the pattern of the other. And you're messing up the thing that way. And especially even if you have 2 full stacks, one on either side. I worked a hall in Ohio recently, permanent square dance hall, beautiful hall, beautiful floor. They had a couple yaks that the hall owned. One of them was mounted in a fairly appropriate place, almost behind the collar on the wall. The other one was mounted, cut in half on either side on the back wall. And I took a look at that. And they said, we need it. We have bad sound. People in back frequently have troubles hearing. And I said, I bet you that's because the back one's connected. And the dance I called there, I disconnected the back one, and we had a reasonably full hall and had good sound, and nobody complained. Sometimes, if dancers do complain, you get a second hall, a speaker, you set it up where they're complaining, not really too close. Bring a cable over and lay it down next to the amplifier. But don't plug it into it, because you're going to screw up the pattern. What you do then is you play with your tone controls a little, get a little more high frequency and a little less music and what have you so they can hear you better. There are occasions that you'll have a partition sticking out, protruding from the side of the wall, where there's sliding doors or the kitchen or coat room or men's room on the side. And behind that and past that, sometimes the sound is a problem. And that was the case in the hall in Ohio. And what I recommended there is they pull their speakers off the back wall and stick them halfway down the hall behind that thing sticking out, facing towards the back. So where the front sound stopped, because of that interference with the pattern as it went down. The back one could fill in, and sometimes it is necessary with a back one filling in. But when you do, don't fight it coming back out again. I guess one last comment: if you're working outside, a big ball field or what have you, columns versus a folded horn type of thing, it's not as necessary to eliminate reflections off the ceiling because you don't have a ceiling up there. It just disperses into the sky real fine. You don't have to worry about it. So you don't need the column as much on the outside arena as you do on an inside to eliminate and focus the sound. But you still are sending stuff up that you're wasting. You're not focusing the needed energy down where you need it. So if you've got plenty of power in your amplifier and want to crank it way up and a bunch of speakers around, you probably can cover it just as well. Actually, if you put one speaker per square, you can cover just about any hall, but it's not always practical. Anyway, hopefully, that's basically what I got to say. Hopefully, some of it made sense to you. Some of it might improve some of the sounds and the way you set up your equipment. It's not only what you have, but it's how you use it. And I haven't been watching the clock, so I hope I haven't cut in too much into Dale's time. That's about the extent of what I have, unless we want. I think, do we have time to field some questions on this now and then go to Dale's and field questions on his? If there are any questions, please speak into the microphone, and we're going to try and get a microphone down on the floor. Here comes the mic. The one that's on the stand back there, they took it away, is not connected. But if you have any questions, I will be glad to stand here and say, it's not on my notes, I don't know. We'll see what happens. Go ahead.
Hi, my name's Kathy, and I'm from California. And I have a question about an odd-shaped hall. I tried calling in an L-shaped kind of hall, and there were posts in the middle, and the stage was in the corner, and I just had a terrible time trying to get the people in the back to hear it. So I wonder if you would have any suggestions on how to handle that.
First of all, I can believe you that you had a terrible time. I've called there, or similar ones up in New Hampshire and what have you. Actually, the one I'm remembering, not only that, the floor was slanted. If you're down the end of 1L, you're just not going to get anything around that corner.
It was like in the corner of the L. The stage was, yeah.
If you're in the elbow of the V.
The elbow of the, yeah, that's right.
Okay, if you're down one end, then you're going to have to put a speaker heading into the other part. Uh-huh. If you're on the corner of 1L, you reasonably should be able to stick a column up, and you only need about 90 degrees, aim it right for the other corner you're facing at. So you should get somewhat dispersion off to the right and some off to the left.
So you're going to kind of diagonally instead of pointing straight toward.
Yeah, let's say that this was one leg of the L and that was another one. Mm-hmm. I'd almost think about pointing it that way, so half would go that way and half would go that way. Mm-hmm. If you do have two columns, if you do have a really wide dispersion problem like that, and I was going to mention this and forgot, one thing, so you don't make a wide, two things interfering with each other, one way of doing it that has advantages but also has disadvantages is stick one column on top of the other. Now, the advantages, you don't decrease your horizontal dispersion. And what you do is you slant one a little to the left and one a little to the right. Okay. You don't screw up your horizontal pattern. You do have another problem. There are two. One, it's precarious. You've got to make sure it doesn't fall. Two is all of a sudden you have a column that's too long and you may be focusing the sound too much. And you've got to watch out that you don't go above or below the heads of the dancers. Another way that I think is more practical, and it does screw up your horizontal dispersion a little, but you're compensating by having to, is put them side by side. One right around here, one pointed a little to the right, one pointed a little to the left, as close together as possible. So as much as possible, they're acting like just a really short column that way. And the horizontal dispersion, the canceling you get that way, is probably canceled by the fact you've got one aim down that hall and one down that. So, stick them where you do, but one aim there, and really close together.
And would you turn the top one upside down so that the high-frequency speaker would be on top?
I'm saying get two of these. I'm not saying take half of this next to it and the other half.
Oh, I see.
I'm saying two complete ones if you had a way of doing that.
Yeah.
The trunk of my car and my budget aren't large enough.
Would they have to be the exact same kind, or could they be two different kinds?
They wouldn't have to be the same kind. There is something that I'd almost rather not get into, but if we had time and there are questions, there's such a thing that, and I know they've talked about many times, the impedance matching of speakers. And if you have a mismatch of two speakers, two different speakers can still have the same impedance match. But if you have different impedances, you're likely to get more volume out of one than the other if you have two different kind of speakers working together. And so take the bigger hall and aim the louder one down that direction, and the quieter and aim the other one down that is one way of doing it.
Okay, thank you.
Hopefully that'll help. Next.
Okay, Ken Brennan from London, Ontario. We have what we consider a fairly difficult hall in the summertime. It's a long, narrow hall with deep wood beams on the ceiling that come down about 4 feet. Now, putting a stack at the front, we lose it pretty quickly. So we put one stack at the front and another stack completely at the back, out of phase. This seems to work. What is your opinion on that?
First of all, as I said, partitions sticking out on the side is a problem. Same thing with beams across the top. You can notice a dramatic screwing up the sound as you pass those. I suspect if you put a speaker out of phase on the back, coming back towards the front, that you're going to end up with some of the frequencies are going to work fine and some aren't, depending on the wavelength of the sound versus the length of the hall. And my preference would be that halfway down where the sound starts to become bad, you put the second speakers and aim them towards the back so that they're not, what is getting past that partition isn't interfering. Unless you had a total loss, so the front stuff wouldn't get back at all and the back stuff wouldn't get forward. But I'd be much happier. In fact, I saw one hall where they took and put a column, not an expensive one, not a good quality for a thing, but it was good enough anyway, and they stuck it horizontally just on that beam, and it covered the last 2 rows of squares because it was close enough. You didn't need a projection. It fit nicely up there. It bothered me because they had the darn thing, at the wrong angle, but whenever I see these things on their side, I say, they're more stable that way. But that's about all I can say for them. But if you're not having total success with it, give a try of halfway down, just beyond that point, putting the second one on the side and aiming that towards the second half.
This just made an impossible hall at least livable.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Jerry?
Hi, Don. Jerry Junk, Nebraska. Don, on a yak stack in a bad hall, I have at times cracked the 2 speakers, just split them, put something in between. Can you explain why that helps a bad hall? I know it works, but why?
Let me explain what Jerry's talking about. Opening this up and doing this kind of a thing.
Exactly.
Putting a little spacer inside.
So the 2 faces aren't parallel.
What you're doing is changing the pattern a little and getting it a little tighter in the horizontal way, and possibly the reflections and such were needed to. I know people do that. In fact, I've done it myself on some occasions. It just tightens things up a little bit more, and maybe the reflections and acoustics were such that it pulls that horizontal pattern in more. I have even pulled the top half apart and somehow gotten it held so that the top half was not only slanted a little bit more, but turned a few degrees. So just like these speakers are alternating, I've had the bottom speaker going to the left a little bit and the top one to the right a little bit, still lined up on top of each other.
Rich Gearman, California. I had an experience about a year and a half ago. I went to a dance. The hall was about twice as long as this, a little bit wider. The stage about the same size. They had a full yak on either side. I was dancing in a front square right in front of the stage. And normally I'm fairly known for having a cast iron stomach as far as amusement park rides and things like that. But the effect of the sound pressure just traveling from one side of the square to the other was so dramatic, it actually made me physically nauseous and dizzy.
Again, if you're stuck calling in that kind of a situation, try and unplug one of the speakers when nobody's looking. It'll work better. Dan?
Dan Koff from New Jersey. I had the misfortune of calling a dance and then repeating it several years now because I did such a good job of sounding a horrible hall. Basically, I looked at the hall. There's this lovely rectangular shape at one end, and then it's basically a cone off to the other side. And then where the two join, there's a partition that sticks out of the walls and the ceiling. and the group was large enough they needed both halves. And I, like you, don't have enough of a pocket or a trunk to carry enough speakers to sound that. I decided I would I would not be up on the stage. I would not be in the best place for me to see what they were doing. I put myself and the speaker standing right by that divider so that the sound would go to both sides a little bit more equally and everybody would hear it. As I said, I couldn't see what was going on quite as well, but they could hear me. I just wanted to share a solution.
Before we go on, let's call it quits with the number standing for questions after those that are standing now because of the time that we have allotted. And one more quick thing that I forgot to mention, I just tried an interesting experiment. One of the things to do, I mentioned slanting your speaker a little bit. It helps distribute the sound evenly between the front and the back people. It also eliminates and helps eliminate the reflection directly off the back wall. And as I was standing here listening to Dan talk, and actually before others and myself now too, I'm hearing that interference coming off the back wall, and I turned it, you may have noticed, just about that much, and it was amazing how much I could hear that, or not hear all of a sudden the reflection off the back wall. That much of a tilt does enough to kill the back and make the sound better. I don't know how it's doing for you guys there. As Irv's brochure says, it makes it better for the caller if nothing else. Calling with your hand up this way is... But you know, here, let me give you a hint, and I'll try and make this brief so we can get these questions in too. In my calling briefcase, I carry a piece of 1/8-inch nylon parachute cord, piece of rope, about 6 feet long. And what I use that for is anything I need, but more often than not, tie it on the handle on the back of the yak, bring it back and tie it on one of the back legs of the table, stick something underneath the front end of this thing, and that rope keeps it from falling over. And this is halls where I don't bring my stand. Generally I bring the stand, but there's one hall I work with that it's just not practical to have a stand. There's not enough room. The ceiling's too low, and the kewer's on the other half of the table, and there's no room for the stand on that side. So I put my stack just leaning forward slightly with the rope tied to the back leg of the table with a sliding knot so I can get the angle just right so it won't fall. And you guys can hear the advantage of carrying a few ounces of rope around with you if you got something like to stick under the corner of it. Next.
Yeah, Larry Pryor from Florida. I've got a hall that I use to yak for a monitor behind me, but because of the stage being indented so much that I just figured I wouldn't carry. So that means I've got two regular Hilton regular speakers on the side. The suggestion is being to use one in each of the corner, but you angle it at each of the corner. In other words, you're making an X in there. What's your opinion? Is that a good idea?
My opinion would be use one of them and just have it spray the side. Now, I've been talking about optimum sound, talking about the performance as a caller and such. One of the things that I notice when I'm coaching callers and there are certain things they do wrong, I realize they can't hear the music. One of the things that probably I have more answer complaints about my calling than anything else is your music's too loud, we can't hear the words. And what happens is I have to hear the music for me to call with it, and I adjust the balance here so it sounds about right, and the music's got to get all the way from the speaker all the way back to me to sound loud enough to me. So what I do to maintain that, to improve that, is I stand in front of the speaker. Generally, I've got a stand that's actually, I have the speaker behind me. I have a stand here and the speaker up at this point here. And I'll stand slightly in front of it. And I have a directional mic, so when it's not aimed at the speaker, I don't have feedback problems. That way I can hear the music, and yet it's still high enough and away from the table so the pattern's right. Now, when you have a recessed stage like that, and that's sort of a cubby hole in the wall where the ceiling is too tight too, I can't do that. And we have one square dance barn not too far from home, Baypath Barn, where they have big boxes all along the side walls. New owners finally put a couple something on the front walls, and still I try and put the stack in the thing inside the cubby hole, and the combination of it all is still terrible. They finally have set up a small monitor back there that I can set up so I can hear, and I try and have faith that the projection, again, this is one speaker per square out there, and by the third tip, either I've gotten used to the balance or the dancers have gotten tired of complaining, but it's not a good situation, and if I were building my own square dance hall, I would be careful not to make something that was that convenient and nice looking, because you got to hear it. That's tough. But if you do have a monitor in there, like you said, and then 2 stacks on the corners, I'd try it with just one of those stacks.
Oh, okay. Right.
Lauren Cochran from Oregon. You mentioned earlier about the folded horns, and I had a question about when you use a folded horn, the sound coming out of the back of the speaker is out of phase with what's coming out of the front, right?
Yes.
Then they turn that sound and they run it out the front. Doesn't that tend to cancel the front signal?
What they do is there's a finite period of time that it takes the sound to travel from the back of the speaker all the way to that where it comes out. And I need 2 hands, so let me put the mic down for a second. But trying to get 2 birds with 1 stone here. Basically, by the time the one compression comes out the back and comes around to the front, you've had enough of a delay so the front compression, the next compression in the series is coming together, so you have 2 compressions working together. They're slightly a split second later in time, but close enough so you've got one reinforcing the other instead of being out of phase with it. Now, that only holds true for a given frequency. And what they do is they design it so that that frequency, by the size of the box and the length of the path, that frequency, when you want to try and generally reinforce the low notes, and your basic response out of this loudspeaker, that the bigger it is and the more compliance it has so it can move back and forth, the lower notes it'll produce. But you reach a point down where those low notes drop off and you don't get, they start to be dropped down. So what they do, drop down in amplitude. So they reinforce those low notes to bring those up and stretch that curve down. And that's how they, with bass reflex, in fact, that's what the name says, and folded horns, that's the game they play with that.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Nani Arena from San Jose, California. I have a room almost as big as this one with only a square and a half of people.
I wish I did.
And we have echo chambers there, and I mean echoes. I can't stand on a platform. I can't use anything on a platform because the sound, you can actually see it hit the walls. So we've taken and we've set in one corner, and I put my table in the middle of the floor, aiming at the wall, and I have mismatched speakers and hearing loss in this ear, so I have a speaker over here over my head and the other one down here so that they can hear and I can hear it, but we still have so much echo. It's just driving me crazy.
Are any of the speakers column speakers?
Well, they're tall.
Oh. Okay.
Yeah.
But what I'm
they're Ashton speakers.
Sometimes when you've got a real problem hall, some of the things you've got to do in addition are try and cut down the echoes that are coming, so they only come once. And people have done a lot of successful things with draping curtains on the back. And if it's not your hall and you just use it occasionally, you're using the school cafeteria that's got wonderful windows overlooking the courtyard. Frequently, they're curtains and drapes. Close the drapes. They absorb the sound beautifully rather than a nice hard surface of the windows reflecting and what have you.
Yeah, we do that.
We
close just about everything. In fact, we're thinking of taking some of the tables and rolling them around and making a little room. If that would help. Thank you.
I've been talking a lot about yak stacks and directors, and I don't. The reason I'm not pushing them, I've had experience with them. And with their designer, I have not had the opportunity to use too many other column speakers, so I don't know whether they have all the principles of, the high frequency in the center only and what have you. It's not an endorsement of yak stack. I happen to know they're right. The others may also be. I just haven't had the need to go beyond what's worked for me. But please don't take it as an endorsement for this over any other type. I also have not been watching the time. I just know what I wanted to share with you guys. And if I've cut into Dale's more than I should have, my apologies. But thank you for your attention. And let me turn it back to Jack.
Thanks, Donna. That was very informative, and I think we all benefited from that. Let's turn our attention to a little different aspect of this whole sound and presentation, and hear a few words from Dale McClary.
Okay, thank you, Jack. I would approach this from a little non-technical angle, because mainly I'm not technical. But now that we have the system, we have the speakers, what do we use this thing for? I want it to, I use it as a tool to project myself through the mic, through the amplifier, through the wires, through the speaker out them folks out there, to make them think I'm out there with them. That's what I try to do with a PA system. A lot of things that maybe you all guys do all this, I don't know. But when I go to any dance, especially if I haven't been to the hall in any period of time, I always like to get to the dance at least 30 minutes early. And I like to set the sound up and play music and walk around the hall, even though I've been there a few months later. I like to make sure that the system is working, because this is our livelihood, or mine, because I'm in it full time. As I said, it's a tool to project myself to these folks, to entertain them for the evening, because I think that's what we are. The best program, the best choreography, the best music in the world is no good unless the amplifier works. There's always a possibility, and I call in several different halls, one in particular on the East Coast. It's 45-foot ceiling. It's got glass, and it is a problem. But I find things in bad halls, if you enunciate the words, after you've set up this PA set, and we've learned this and how to set the speakers, and we've done that, you still can help by over-enunciating, I call over-enunciating the words, using as little power as you can. When I start the dance, any dance, in any hall, I like to get on the mic, and we're ready to go. I put the music on softly first, bring it up a little bit, and bring it down, and I use my mic, and I generally use the greetings. How you doing, guys? It's good to be here. And if there's anybody in the back of the hall in the back square can't hear, especially with my own clubs, can't hear you, Dale. I say, okay, just a minute. And I do this, which is nothing. And that's much better. Okay, this is an old trick. Like I said, there's nothing new here. But when a caller is calling, I hear a caller say, can you hear me in the back? That tells me he's got a problem already. Okay, you need to learn and make sure your sound is set up before you start. A PA set needs maintenance also. Sometimes if you're busy, you tend to forget it. You let it go out in the middle of a dance, or when you turn it on, you'll remember it better next time. Basically, as I said, I'm not technical, but such things as a lubrication of the shaft on the Hilton turntable, changing the needle. At least mine runs 35 hours a week. I change it every 2 weeks. I probably wouldn't have to do that, but needles are somewhat cheaper than records over the long haul. And that your PA set is your livelihood. Learn to use it and project yourself. Get those people to feel that you are coming through this mic, through the cords, amplifier, the speakers, and actually out there with them. That's what I try to do. In the presentation of singing calls, I'm a country music lover. And if I don't watch myself, I'll play Randy Travis records all night long. And nothing but a strong fiddle or a 5-string, I can listen to it forever. So I try to make myself programmed to call and use music that is different and not strictly the same type music. Another habit I have, it's very bad, if my wife is with me, all I have to do is look at her, and she does this. It means I'm too loud. I believe her. She's been with me ever since I started it. There's a lot of things that you can do, again, in the non-technical aspect, I think, is you are an entertainer. These are the tools of your trade. They are only as good as you work at it to make them. The best PA set in the world is no good unless you have all the other aspects of calling and presenting yourself. You must be heard. You must be pleasant, even though the engine dropped out of your car in the parking lot. Or you get a call not long ago at a festival overseas in San Diego, California. 20 minutes before I went on stage, I got a call my sister died. And my older sister, and that was a little pressure. I still went on the stage because I was scheduled. I'm sure the people probably would say, we're sorry, but they never knew it until I come off the stage. I've never missed a dance in 26 years. I hope I never do. And there's a lot of things that you can do to make yourself successful, but there's more to it than just the PA set itself. Knowing how to use it properly is one thing. I'm not sure that I do. I set it to suit myself, frankly speaking, to me. If I get repeated requests, we can't hear you, Dale, I say, well, I've got a problem. But you must know how to do that. And if you do that and people hear you and they dance, an old caller once told me, he said, you know what the sign of a successful dance is? Do they come in the door next week? Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Dale. Well said. We have about 10 minutes. If there are any other questions on this subject from either one of our speakers, we'd be glad to entertain those. Oh, I guess he wasn't. I thought he was coming down here. Okay. This is your opportunity. You got these guys here. You know, if there's anything that you didn't get a chance to say before, we do. Would like you to use the mic, though, if you would, please.
Thank you. There go all the prophets. I'm Hank Green from New York City. I had occasion to call on a number of occasions at a hall this wide and possibly 10 feet longer, where the acoustics were so bad that from the microphone to halfway to the rear of the hall, people could hear. And regardless of the way that yak stack was bent over to avoid echo from the rear, nothing helped. And so they tried drapes on the walls, which helped a little bit. And so one of our people called Hilton in California, and they said, this is our problem, what do we do? So he said, well, the answer to that problem seems to be very simple, which is that the reason I mention it is because you indicate that putting another stack at the other end of the hall is not the thing to do. Am I quoting you correctly? Yes.
In most cases, I hear one coming up that maybe it wasn't.
Anyway, we put that yak stack back there, and they said tilt them both so that the dancers in the center hopefully will both get the sound at the same time. And it worked.
Part of what you're doing, I gather, is tilting it a little further than normal so that you aren't trying to get the front to cover the back, but only the first half of the group, and the back one to cover the back half. And so there's likely to be less interference. I have worked in some halls, one in particular, that it was, they couldn't have designed it worse if they had tried. And it's really amazing. I didn't have a yak stack. I had a cheaper one at the time, but despite that, the only real solution is half the floor can't hear, so they go home early, and so you only call to the front half anyway. But not a good solution. I'm glad that something worked for you.
Wayne Ball, Fenton, Michigan. Is there any advantage that you know of using a folded horn along with a column for quality of music? And also, do you have any comments about outdoor use?
One comment, my thoughts if I had a folded horn that was there also. One of the things about folded horns and bass reflex and such is that they do have advantages over columns, or columns that are designed small enough to be carried. And that is, they generally have a larger cone on the speaker, and they generally have a larger box, and therefore they respond much better to the low frequencies. And so you get a better high fidelity type of sound. They make a much better living room speaker. In a place, you get better high quality sound, and we do, as far as the extremes of highs and lows, especially the low end. And we do want good music and good sounding sound for our dancers. It makes a more enjoyable dance. Makes it more enjoyable for the listening to the music. And if you're in a living room, a hi-fi speaker, I think that the calling folded horns on the market would make a much better speaker for that. If you are looking for the compromise, and a column speaker could be made to respond to lower frequencies too. It would take being much larger, probably more expensive too, but the main thing physically, it would be much larger and heavier. And the column speaker designers around have gone for a compromise of, one, we want to communicate. We want to get the word across to the dancers without the interference and the pattern correct. Two is we want to make it as portable as possible so that it's possible to carry it in and out and around. And three, let's get as much high fidelity sound as possible to go with it. And it's on number three that the column speakers have sacrificed a little so they can do better on the other ends. Now, I remember many years ago there was a dancer who was also doing some speaker design kind of thing, and he created a column that, because the bass sounds generally are not as directional, and you don't have to be as directional in focusing with them, you just have to feel the beat kind of thing. He created a two-piece or a two- or three-piece column speaker where there was a big, almost bass reflexy kind of a thing that would go boom, 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 and wouldn't give any high frequencies that would interfere with what's going on. And on top of that, he placed a smaller column of mid-range, and on top of that, a high-frequency column that tended to be only about 3 or 4 inches high, and I don't know, 6 or 7 feet tall or some kind of ridiculous thing. And it sounded, the halls that he used it in, really fine. He brought it to different callers to use at dances he was dancing at. Well, he and a crew of 3 or 4 people would go out to the car and each load a couple arms with stuff, and they'd bring in all sorts of stuff. It had good sound. It was not practical. Now, if you happen to have a bass reflex there in conjunction with your column, maybe you can get some advantage of getting the bass off of that if you had a crossover network or some way of filtering out the high frequency so that doesn't interfere with the pattern of your column, and use that to fill in with the bass, maybe even pointed towards the back wall. You might be able to fill in the low frequencies that these things have sacrificed on and get a little bit better sound, but be careful not to project out and interfere with it. Just do it on the low frequencies. It's a thought.
Again, my name is Dan Koft. I'd like to share an experience with a solution. A hall that was rectangular, but an echo chamber. By the time I dropped the volume on voice and music to the point where I would not get bad echoes halfway back, no sound whatsoever, much less further back. I found a solution that just sort of out of desperation, I remembered something that I remember seeing Betsy Gata try at one point. I turned the speaker around, faced this hard wall. It was a hard concrete cinder block wall. Bounced it once before they got it. And it still wasn't good, but at least they could hear.
Interesting. Sometime maybe, hopefully I'll never have to try it again, but it sounds like it'd be worth knowing about just in desperation if nothing else works.
My name is Dave Williams from Colorado. I call it a dude ranch, where they built this spatial hall to hold these dances in. It's 30 feet wide and 80 feet long. So It's kind of like calling in a tunnel. The problem also is they have a 3/4 inch plywood floor is all. So you get a lot of foot echo off of this. It's extremely difficult to sound. I've tried about everything. And the only thing I can even approach doing it is by putting one small speaker up front facing directly down the hall and two on the side on a 45-degree angle. Is there a better approach to this than that? If there is, I'd sure love to hear it.
I can make all sorts of hypotheses here without seeing it and hearing it and trying it, but I don't know how good. When you say on the 45-degree ones, are you talking? You want to take this one too, or are we out of time? Okay, this will be the last one here. Are you talking about on the side right near it? Okay, I guess my instinct would be, part way you'd put the one in the front, hopefully a column, going as far as you can. Then you'd walk down and listen to the pattern, and where the pattern just drops off and the sound stops, I'd put some reinforcing ones there, pointing at the back, so they don't interfere with the stuff in the front to fill in. And I think I'd go on one side, not both, because I don't want those two to interfere with each other. Yeah, and carry as far down as you can with that. And when you hear it drop off, get another one, and again pointing on the bottom. That's what I would try. Yeah, if you have that, I'd say that's the best you can do at that point. We got one more question.
No question. I own. My name is Earl Steele. I'm from St. Petersburg, Florida. I own the Oxbow Hall there. It's a square dance hall that's been active more than 20 years. And when it began, the sound was very, very bad. High ceilings. We dropped the ceiling. It's drywall type ceiling. The sound, that increased, that helped the sound a little bit, but not much. So what we wound up doing, one dancer there at that time owned a carpet company, a big one. They covered some of the walls with carpet. The rest of the walls are covered with acoustical ceiling, and we sold the ceiling tile to the dancers to recover the money and allowed the dancers to decorate those ceiling tile with their own logos, whatever. And we have 2 yak stacks in there that's strategically located by Mr. Gross, Irving Gross, the designer owner of Yak Stack. He also designed a switch that allows the caller to select either of the yak stacks in any sequence that he wants. The ceiling is unique. It's egg crate dividers, the dividers out of old egg crates. And it's very effective. The sound is very good. Just thought I'd throw that in if you wanted to ever build your own hall.
Let me throw in one thing that Earl pointed out. I think I made quick allusions to, but basically you want the dancers to hear it once the first time off the speaker, and you don't want them to get reflections. Just like inside a cabinet where you don't want the sound bounced back at the speaker, and you put sound absorbing things, the more you can absorb stuff on the walls and the ceiling and such, and have it so that what the dancer hears is only once and not the reflections, the much better shot they have of hearing it without interference. One last thing I wanted to do was to thank Irvin for having put all the time and effort into creating column speakers that are